Hello, welcome to the video. So, as you can see, this is about the statistical physics of human condition. So, as you can understand, it's not just about statistical physics. It's not a technical physics video. At the same time, it's not it's a bit of both actually. It's both physics and philosophy. There will be a lot of philosophical ramblings about the nature of existence, the human condition, but I'll also be using some pretty interesting stat phys metaphors to, there will, maybe just as a disclaimer, just to be clear up front, there will be some amount of nonsense as well, or some rant. But in the middle of it all, I think it's a pretty interesting, it's going to be a pretty interesting video, and there will be some sense hidden somewhere in the nonsense as well. So if you decide to watch, well, let me know what you think in the comments. And just I want to show you the t-shirt I'm wearing right now. It's one of my favorite t-shirts. It says entropy isn't what it used to be. And it's not just it's true scientifically, because the entropy is entropy, and the arrow of times, the entropy increases at every minute. So the entropy is really not what it used to be. It never will, because the entropy keeps on increasing. You can never get the entropy to be what it was at any given point of time in the past. But today, in this particular video, let's not talk about very technical physics. Let's just talk about the human condition. And why statistical physics? Well, because I think statistical physics is a very good lens, a very good perspective to analyze, not just the human condition, but any complex system with a large number of parts, whether interacting or non-interacting. And well, personally, I think the reason for this human condition and statistical physics, this idea is that actually I was having a conversation. This is actually very good, because these kind of conversations really spark these kind of apparently crazy but also very important, I believe, important ideas and metaphors, because metaphors serve a purpose I believe, beyond just making the statement interesting or just capturing public attention. That's of course one of the reasons, but metaphors does more than bridge that gap. But it also, I think, it gives us new insights. And from a scientific point of view, these insights are not to be taken like these are just insights. These are not real science, so we shouldn't take them for granted, like for word. These need not be scientific truths. But even if they're not scientific truths, we can these tell us a lot about systems, and in rare cases this can also help in scientific generating, like actually, like genuinely scientific insights as well, I believe. Well, anyway, so first of all, if we think about the human condition, what do we mean by the human condition? Again, I don't have a script. I'm not I just have a rough idea of what points I would want to cover, because I was because a recent discussion with one of my friends sparked this thought in my head, and that's why I'm so I just know what I want to say, but I don't have a script. So but still, I try to keep this video concise and to the point, but at the same time, it's really important, and I have quite a few things to discuss. So yeah, first of all, we often ask questions about why is life so miserable, why am I like this, like why did this happen to me, why does it always happen to me, why is it always me, what. Now this comes from a very, now this is not statistical physics yet. I'll tell you when statistical physics, when I'll bring in stat phys. But for now, what I'm saying is that this is a very general pattern which we observe in all of us, and it's true. It's not about being too self-centered. Yeah, if in extreme doses this thing is really unhealthy, but to some extent it's true, because well, you cannot grow out of it, and it's natural. That's how you are, because we are all humans and we all have this individuality. So yeah, if we are really good humans, we will also care about others, but at the same time, let's be honest about it, we all do care about ourselves a bit more than others, a lot more than others, in fact. But so but the thing about always playing the main character, because in our heads we always play the main character, and it's true, because in our life, we indeed, in my life, indeed I am the main character. In your life, indeed you are the main character. That's true. That's in a way, subjectively, that's definitely true. There is no point denying that. You cannot talk about in your life you're the main character, full stop. But yeah, the sometimes the problem with this main character perspective, like always because we unconsciously start believing that everything revolves around us, at least everything in our immediate surroundings revolve around us. This is a very psychological, this is a psychological truth, by the way. It's not a problem, it's not a disorder. It's true for all of us, in varying intensities to varying extents, but it's more or less true for all of us. And it's well, of course, consciously we don't believe that everything is happening because of us, because well, we are not the most powerful people. We are not in, I'm not saying my viewers are like, most of us at least, we are not billionaires, we are not influential people. So We don't consciously believe that everything revolves around us, but unconsciously we do believe that. We form that, how do I put it, that kind of mindset, or that kind of unconscious, I mean, we operate under that impression unconsciously. Because, and to some extent it makes sense, because that's how we interpret other humans socially, which is a very important skill as a social creature. Only problem being sometimes we overinterpret it. So for instance, if you go out on the road and like, I mean, I don't know, maybe something out of the ordinary happens or something, your immediate thought is, did they see me, what would they think if they see me in this position. Maybe you do something stupid in public, like nothing, not a crime or nothing very bad, but maybe something stupid, a bit awkward. Your immediate thought is, did they see me? Yeah, and maybe some other people, they were just passing by, they were laughing among themselves, but maybe they didn't observe you. Or even if they did observe, maybe they're not even thinking about you, that okay, maybe you tripped and fell down in public. That doesn't mean everyone around you who is laughing because of that, because you are that important character. They were maybe having a funny conversation in themselves anyway. Point is, we always jump to conclusions and believe that everything that's happening around us is happening around us, like it's revolving around us, it's happening, involving us, because of us, which is not true. And that's why when we ask these questions, yeah, there are, in every human's life, there are good times, there are bad times, and this is where statistical physics will enter. But the point is, yeah, when I am having the bad times of my life, it's natural that I start asking, why me. That's true, more or less we all do that, no point denying that. And when it's good times, we don't question that. Usually it's okay, it's good, yeah, I worked hard, so I deserve this, that kind of thing, usually. Now the point is, if you think about all of this from a statistical physics perspective, there are lots of metaphors, lots of stuff you can come up with, and I did quite a few previous videos on this, not exactly on this, like the statistical physics of human condition, but using stat phys metaphors to explain, for instance, the difference between hard work and talent, using statistical physics and that kind of arguments to explain some aspects of human behaviors. I've done such videos previously, but this video is about, I want to share a single observation in this video, but this is a far more general observation in my view than all those previous videos. And that is that, well, in my view, it's like a field. So maybe I'm talking about a statistical field theory. I'm talking about a mean field, maybe. I don't know. And it's an anisotropic mean field, by the way. So all these terms are a bit technical, but once I like, the idea is not really technical. The mathematics surely is. Point is that we have questions like, okay, why is he a bad guy? Why is he a good guy? Why am I like this? So basically, we have this tendency of attaching properties to particulars. Now in metaphysical language, we have this definition of properties versus particulars. Simply means that if something is a property, I mean, what I mean is that it's a property is something you cannot see. It's not a real physical object, but at the same time it's very important. For instance, if I say and yeah, most importantly, property can be shared between different objects. For instance, if it's a property of hardness, so a rock, a stone, it can be hard. At the same time, this table in front of me, it's hard. This camera, this mobile I'm recording on, this mobile is also hard. It's not like a sponge, it's not soft. So hardness is a property. It's not exclusive to one object. It's not exclusive to this mobile. It's neither exclusive to this table. It's neither exclusive to some rocks. It's shared between different objects. So this is what I mean by property. But for particular, a particular means an object. So it cannot be shared, because if I'm talking about this mobile, it's right here. It's a particular. It cannot be anywhere else in the world right now, because right now it's here. Yeah, of course, this particular model of this particular model of the mobile that I'm using, there are many such mobiles in the market, but exactly this particular mobile, which has my information and like my mobile, it's right here right now. It cannot be anywhere else. It's a particular or an object. But how do you define a particular? That's a very interesting metaphysical argument. Still, we are still speaking metaphysics. There is no statistical physics yet. So let's say you have a table, and I ask you, what's a table? And so how do you define a table? This is where things get really interesting and also a bit difficult, because you can say that table is something made up of wood. Maybe your first attempt. No, that's not true, because there can be tables made up of glass, made up of steel, made up of, I mean, a table is not like, does not have to be made up of wood. Although a majority of tables are made up of wood, but that's not a definition of a table. That's not a general definition. You can say, okay, it's something on which we keep things. Well, that's again, that's not exclusive to table. We can keep things on bed. You can keep things on your bed, on a lot of, on your chair. I mean, just saying that, it's not really a general definition of table. If I tell you that, can you tell me what I'm thinking about? The only clue being that it's something we keep things on, then table is not the only possible answer. So that's why this definition doesn't work. You can say it's something which has some legs. A lot of even a chair has legs. It's something which has 4 legs. Well, you can have a table which has 3 legs. A chair also has 4 legs. So you see what I'm saying. Whatever definition you come up with, without showing a picture of a table, of course, because then we have this cognitive bias. We have seen tables. We all know our brain has an expectation. So by seeing the picture, we can understand that we're talking about a table. But just without using the word table, if I ask you to define a table, of course you cannot use the word table because you are defining that word itself. All the definitions that you are likely to come up with, they are all properties. They are not the particular, not the definition of the object itself. Having being made up of wood is a property. Being made up of glass is a property. Having 3 legs or 4 legs is a property. Being something you can keep things on is also a property. But they are not like. Then the question is, what is a table? And one interesting way to think of this would be that if you remove a table of all its properties, if you strip the table of all its properties, that means if you take away all the properties of the table, like it being made up of wood or whatever it's made up of, it having legs, it having the property that we can keep things on it, if you remove all the properties, then what would remain? If you think about it deeply, you will see that nothing would remain in that case. So then what's table? It's nothing. It's nothing, but on top of this nothing, on top of this, let's say, void, we are adding some particular properties. So what matters is a particular combination of property. So this particular combination of property creates a table. That particular combination of property creates a chair. This particular combination of properties creates maybe a human. But underlying all of us is this emptiness, if you think in a way, because the logic being, again, this is metaphysics, this is not science, by the way. I'm not saying I believe in this, but it's a good way of thinking. That's why I'm illustrating this. Because the logic being that if you really ask to define any of these particulars, you cannot define them without using the properties. So without the properties, they are nothing, in a way. And now the question is, if we try to add a little bit of statistical physics and use this same perspective to think about humans. So let's say each human have some baseline, like some basic base instincts, or you could say like something which is shared among all humans, which could be nothing, by the way, like, because this nothing, if you say that this nothing is something, that's again a philosophical question. Like, is nothing something? You can say that no, nothing is nothing. We cannot talk about nothing because it's nothing. But at the same time, in some cases you can consider that nothing is important. In itself it's important, because the absence of something can cause something. So if something can cause something, then you have to take into account the existence of that thing. Why do I say this? Well, there could be many examples. The absence of oxygen can kill a human. So let's say, if I am in vacuum, I mean, this is just an example. This is a very, very poor example, I understand. But what I'm saying is that if you say that nothing is not something, but sometimes nothing, which means the absence of something, has a causal power. Just like the absence of oxygen can kill and why is it important to take nothing into account, to keep a tag on the nothingness and not just say that it's nothing so we can just forget about it? Is because this illustration might help. I read this in a metaphysics book a long time ago, but I remember this in this context. Let's say you have because you really cannot distinguish between nothingness. Let's say there is nothing. So it's if A is not present, then it's absence of A. But if B is not present, then it's absence of B. But how do you differentiate between the absence of A and absence of B? I mean, presence of A and B would be easy to differentiate because you know that this is A and this is B. They're different. You know how they're different and all that. But if A is absent, it's a bit subtle because there can be differences in some cases. For instance, if A is a person and B is a different person, and you are alone in a room, then in the absence of A could feel different to you than the absence of B, although it's absence in both cases. But in some other cases, you cannot really differentiate between the absence of something. For instance, let's say you don't have a car. So how could you differentiate between the absence or the feeling of not having a Mercedes and the absence or a feeling of not having let's say a BMW? Because both are cars, but you have never owned a Mercedes, you have never owned a BMW ever in your life. You have never owned a car, just as an example. So how can you tell the difference between the absence of this or that? Both are unfamiliar to you. But if both are familiar to you, like A and B, then it can matter. So what I'm saying is that nothing could be a tricky concept sometimes. So we cannot have a uniform law that nothing means we can stop talking about it. It's nothing, not like that. And so for a moment, if we believe that all humans have this some base properties, like not really properties, a base substrate, which could be nothing for all we care, which is shared among all humans, then this is something which let's say is the real the substrate, and on this we add different properties. So a particular combination of property created me, a particular combination of property created you, because you are a different human from me, and this is how humans are created. So again, we have the same lens, particulars and properties. But since we're talking about humans, we're not talking about a table or a table or a rock or a stone or something. The properties here can change, and this is where I think statistical physics could give us some good this is not science, of course. I'm not saying this is how it works, of course. This is just a metaphor, just a way of thinking, but at the same time it's a very interesting way of thinking. This would not be useful to you if you're here to learn statistical physics and if you want to be a physicist, but I think this would be useful to you. And if you are interested in having a different perspective of thinking about society and humans, and which I think is in a way relevant to all of us, not professionally maybe, but this is like as humans, it's kind of relevant to all of us. We all want to know. Well, it's a very interesting perspective, I feel. Is that like I said, statistical field theory. So let's assume that there is a field of properties. So let's remove humans for the moment. Let's forget humans for the moment. There is a field, and in this field exists all possible properties. So by this I mean the good properties like kindness, empathy, respect. Also the bad properties like ego, jealousy, cruelty, whatever it is, like the good human properties I'm talking about. And also maybe it could also be physical properties, like for instance, I don't know, like the height of the person, the whatever it is, the weight of the person, that kind of properties could also count. But yeah, right now, since we are talking about the human condition, I'm focusing a bit more on the subjective ones rather than the physical objective properties. By human condition, we do not mean that why is that person fat and why am I thin. That's not really a very deep philosophical question. It's maybe because that person is obese, or they eat junk food, or they do not do sufficient physical activity, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, when we talk about the human condition, what we're really asking is why is human life so miserable in general? Why are the people in power able to get away with anything but we are not? Why is that person chosen to for that life and I am chosen for this life? Because we didn't sign up for this life. Before we were born, we were not like given a form to fill up that I would like this life, let me tick this, let me not uncheck this. We didn't do that. We just, so then what decides that? That's the real question we're asking when we are talking about human condition, right? So I'll be focusing a bit more on this kind of properties, like properties of kindness, cruelty, and that kind of subjective properties, not the physical properties. And the answer is that, a way to, not the answer, nobody has the answer, but a way to think about this would be, in my view, a statistical physics way to think about this would be that to assume that this field is basically it's a field where we have all the possible properties, and humans are exploring all the configurations uniformly, just like in a statistical physics, like the system is exploring the phase space uniformly. So it's basically, I don't want to go, I have made videos on this, like many previous videos on this. I don't want to really, cannot go into the technical details. If you don't know what it means technically, no worries at all, because the idea is really simple. It simply means that a system can be in many possible configurations, even if it appears to be the same on the outside, like the macro state is the same. On the outside, we are all humans, we have two legs, we have two eyes, and like basically the same structure. From the outside, at least from grossly, we have the same structure, but internally we are all different. Each of us is unique, so we are like different microstates. And a system in statistical physics, for instance, it could be a box of gas, and the gas particles are like moving about, colliding. What they're really doing is that they are exploring different microstates, which means different microscopic configuration. The gas particles are doing all of this, and if I just stop, like take a snapshot of the system at any given moment in time and pin down all the different particles, like their position and their velocity, in which direction is the velocity at that point in time, then I will get one particular microstate. So they're exploring different microstates. That's why they're doing this. And this is a way to ensure that the system remains stable, remains in equilibrium, remains in maximum entropy. Just that the system remains stable, if you don't want me to use the technical terms. That's the thing. And so my view is that since we have of course this argument would make sense if we have a very large number of humans, and I don't know whether the current world population is large enough for this kind of arguments to hold. But yeah, a way to think about this would be that all humans are exploring through this property space, and yeah, arguably uniform, almost uniformly on average. That means there are times when I feel like a bad guy, there are times when I feel like a good guy. That's what I'm saying. So there are times I feel happy, there are times I feel bad, and more or less it's on average every one of us. It's not like some people never feel sad and some people never feel happy. But this is the base argument. But of course, as you can see, there are lots of problems with the argument, because you immediately will say that but some people are criminal. When some people are convicted, like they are like serial killers or that kind of thing, they are born criminals, or even if not born criminals, like they have been doing bad things throughout their entire lives. And some people are like more or less good people. Of course, so if I say that all the people are on average equally good and equally bad, equally criminal and equally non-criminal, that doesn't really make sense. So now you will ask me, how do I explain this using statistical physics? Answer is very simple. It's because I believe that just a second. Yeah, okay, never mind, sorry. So what I personally believe is that it has to do with in principle, a system in equilibrium would want to explore all possible microstates. For us, it's the all possible properties, but I don't think the human condition, the human civilization, the human race currently is in equilibrium. And why would I say that? Like, to continue the metaphor, why would I say that? You can say that human civilization is confined to Earth, so we are not really exchanging information with outside Earth. Everything is happening inside. So why do you say we are in that sense we I mean, it's reasonable to assume that on average this entire human race is like nearly in equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium, of course, there are changes going on local level, but globally, but not necessarily, because that's not necessarily true, because even in a system which is isolated, if there is some gradients, like if even locally, if the system is moving from lower to higher concentration, not from higher to lower but from lower to higher concentration, then that is not really it's not really in equilibrium. And you can say, how could such a gradient exist, because it's an isolated system? Well, because even if in that sense the earth is an isolated system, but it's not really a simple box of gas or something. It's really complicated. There are many layers of correlations and many layers of interactions going on between the humans are not really free particles. We cannot assume that they're independent of each other, right? Of course not. You are not independent of the humans you work with, or your friends, or whatever, your family, whatever. So that means there are additional layers of regulation as well as interaction and correlations going on, which means even in a system which it's not interacting beyond Earth, there can be some gradients which can pull the system away from equilibrium. And even on average, there is no reason to believe that we are always at equilibrium, even on average, even globally. That's my argument. And if we are not in equilibrium, that means what? That means we cannot explore the property space equally. If we are not in equilibrium, that means for us some particular states are more likely than the other states. That's classic statistical physics, right? Only if you're in equilibrium you can use this kind of arguments, that all the microstates are equally likely. And for instance, you have ergodic hypothesis. It's possible to go from one configuration to any other configuration in arbitrarily close to any other configuration in a finite amount of time. But all of that argument breaks down if you're not in equilibrium, and if you're not independent and all that kind of stuff. There are modifications to the arguments, by the way, so I don't want to discuss the details, but yeah, in general, those arguments do not apply in the same form if you're not in equilibrium. And I gave you my reasons why I think that it's a likely assumption that we're not in equilibrium even as a whole. That means for humans, for some humans, yeah, all humans have a tendency to explore the configuration space. That's why sometimes even good people, even you and me, feel like, when we're very angry, we feel like I just want to do something which would be a crime, for instance, but we don't do it because we are not criminals. Because we are biased in such a way that we do not have enough, like it's not possible for us to end up in that part of the configuration space to explore those configurations which are the criminal configurations. And similarly, for some criminals, it's not possible for them to explore our configurations. So there is clearly a bias working, but the fundamental rules, the statistical rules underneath, they still hold. It's just because we're not in equilibrium, in my view. That's just a way to think about it. And why do I say this? Well, now you can ask, so why did this bias? Then again, the question remains, so what decides that who will be born with a tendency to become a criminal or a bad person, and who will be born with a tendency to become a good person? Of course, it depends on your initial conditions, and this is again classic statistical physics. Any kind of system, if you want to do a simulation, if you want to collect a measurement, like collect some data, you first of all you have something which we call the equilibration window. So basically you start to evolve the system according to the laws, the dynamical laws that the system follows. But you don't start measuring, taking the measurements of whatever you're measuring, whatever observable you're working with. You don't start taking measurements immediately. First you let the system evolve for some time, quite a sufficient time, and then you start taking data. Why? Because what we say is that the system should have equilibrated by that time, which means that when we're starting, we are aware that the initial condition can have biases. Definitely, you can start. If it's a complex system, the system can be in many possible initial conditions. And which initial condition you are starting, in most general cases, it does have some degree of biasness, right? And so what you're doing by this equilibrating the system is that you are not taking measurements. Now you're giving the system enough time to equilibrate, to forget the memory of its initial state and to become at equilibrium, so that now it's equally likely to explore all possible microstates. So now that you can take the data and you can get the correct, accurate the average values of the data. I mean, just think about it. I'll give you a very simple example from physics, and then I'll extrapolate it back to human condition. Example could be that, for instance, you are studying a system which is at, I don't know, possible example could be, because like I said, the initial conditions matter. So let's say you are studying a system which starts from a very unlikely initial condition, which means that maybe you say it's a system which has a very high concentration on one side and very low concentration on the other side. So it's a very, but just for an example, I am not going in a very specific case, but just for an example, let's say we all know that in equilibrium the system would want to have equal concentration on both sides, and that's when you start taking measurements, because now the system is in equilibrium. You can take measurements, and these are like robust measurements. You can actually find the average value of your observable if you take measurements now. But if the system is starting that it's almost zero concentration on one side and very high concentration on the other side, if you take measurements now, you will have a bias, because then automatically the system will try to first of all equalize the concentration. So initially the flow would be unidirectional, it will be from the high concentration to low concentration. But that is not the natural tendency of the system. That's just because you are starting in a already biased configuration. But once it's in equilibrium, once the concentration is equal on both sides, then there will be like dynamically the equilibrium will be maintained. So there will be back and forth. Sometimes it would shift from this to that to this. It will go on. It's like that's the like the unbiased state. For humans, well, if you were born in a like very, let's say, very poor family, and like just as an example, please, this is really sad, but this is the harsh truth, by the way. Don't take it otherwise. Let's say we're born in a very poor family, and you are born in such an environment where like maybe crimes and like murder, or maybe stealing for food and that kind of thing is very common. Now that's not the fault of the humans who are born there. That's the fault of the initial conditions, that their initial conditions favored going exploring configurations which end up being a criminal. That's it. And let's say if you're born in a respected family, well, you get a proper upbringing, proper education and stuff like that, and hopefully if you don't fall in bad company, well, you more or less end up a good human being. Again, if you're born in a very rich family, if you have everything handed down to you, if you're born in a like, if everything comes, like if you're overly privileged, then also you start to believe that you can get away with anything. That then also the tendency of becoming a like that kind of thing increases. Point is, so you see, it depends on the initial condition. And well, in simulations you can say that let me wait for 6,000 time steps, 6,000 sweeps, but in real humans, well, we have another constraint, which is we have a finite lifespan. We do not live for long. I mean, yeah, if you consider all of this, the human condition, then 70 years or 80 years or even 90 years is not a really long time. So for us the question is, and my I believe that if you really want to take this metaphor, then I believe that the time it takes for a human being to completely equilibrate and completely come away, like forget the correlation with the initial condition, is way more than just 90 years or 100 years. And that's why in this world we have some people who are clearly bad, some people who are clearly good. But this is because of the initial conditions, not because the system itself prefers good or bad, like the system itself defines good or bad. It's the system underlying laws are still statistical physics. You can use this as a framework for thinking. So now if you ask me that, well, Arpan, are you saying that if you lived for 1,000 years, maybe you could end up being a serial killer sometime in the course of your life? And the answer is, I think yes. Well, I don't know if it's exactly 1,000 years or 1 million years or how long, but I think if we live long enough, there would come a time when I would become the worst criminal ever, and the worst criminal ever would become a really good human being. Because in that case, once we have completely equilibrated, we will try to explore all possible configurations, which includes both the good and the bad configurations. This is what happens. I mean, if you want to take the statistical physics metaphor, then this is what this is the conclusion you get. And this is not really a scientific conclusion, because you can neither prove nor disprove, because the fact remains that you live for 80 years or 90 years. You do not live for 1,000 years. And that's why, while this is a good way of thinking, so let me just finish the video by saying the pros and cons of this argument, because not really cons, but how you should take this argument. I'm not saying that I'm justifying the criminals by this argument, that come on, they were just unfortunate. They were, in some cases, yeah, there is usually a history. People don't turn to criminals for no reason. But again, crimes cannot be justified, under no circumstances. So by this argument, I'm not saying that just because come on, those guys are really bad criminals, I understand, but maybe the initial conditions didn't favor them. Because come on, if you live for 1,000 years, maybe you would be like them. So don't judge them. They're fine. That is not what I'm saying. They're not fine. That's not what I'm saying. Because the fact remains that we live for 80 or 90 years. We don't live for 1,000 years. It's an objective fact. That means we have to, live our life with this constraint in mind. We cannot operate beyond this constraint. So whatever could have happened if we lived 1,000 years is a different matter. But within these 8 years things are objective, and we cannot really cover up for any kind of like crime just using this kind of. So that's not what I'm trying to do, by the way. Crimes needs to be punished because this is objective. This 8 year lifespan, this is also an objective, this is also not subjective. And if you do something which irreversibly damages the life of another person, or maybe if you kill somebody, then there can be no excuse for that. So I'm not trying to justify, but so this is just like how you should take the argument, not to justify them, but now I'm like now you can ask that, okay, so then since this doesn't make sense for human lifetimes, why even you're making a video about this? What even is the point of this argument? Yeah, it sounded interesting, okay, fine, but why? The point of this argument is that there could be some good about this. I mean, if you adopt this kind of thinking framework, not always in life, but sometimes it could be good in the sense that, like, sometimes we question everything in life and we feel very lost, very overwhelmed, very like we feel like giving up, we feel like everything is a plot against us, because especially it happens. I don't know why. Again, if we want to use statistical physics, maybe the system, maybe in the when the system is already in a bad configuration, it tries to explode the similar bad configuration quickly before it moves to a very distant good configuration, because that needs more energy. So that's why in your life, if something bad happens, then sometimes it happens. I don't know if this is general or if this is like how normal this is, but at least in my life, and I know a few people close to me also who have this kind of feelings, that when the bad stuff starts happening, it happens in a series, like a series of bad stuff. And then you just sort of start questioning, life was good so far, but in just the last few weeks, oh my god, one after the other, why did this happen? Why is it always me? Why my life is unfair? I feel like giving up, I feel like killing myself. All those negative and depressing pessimistic thoughts start to come in, because again, it's like you are, in a way, you are stuck in that configuration. Like I said, it's no reason to believe that everything is equally likely, because we are non-ergodic, we are not in equilibrium for one, and also we could even in general be non-ergodic. Ergodicity is not always applicable to all systems. Like I said, there are many layers of interactions, many difficulties, many hidden layers of correlation when we're talking the human. Just to put it in simple line, the human civilization is not a collection of gas particles, of course, just a metaphor. But the thing about this is that if you really start to think about everything in this perspective, that it's just the laws of statistical physics at play, then if something bad happens to you, if someone you trusted maybe does something which like you are not prepared for, you will not think that why did that person do this to me. That you will not start to hate that person, because if you hate that person, it's you are wasting your mental energy, you're wasting your mental peace. Maybe they don't even care, or even if they do care, hating is not a solution, because you are wasting your mental energy. What you should do ideally is you should focus on some good stuff, creating new stuff, and taking yourself in a place which is above them. So you should respond with your work, with your achievements, not by hating. But I understand that is easier said than done, especially if things get very personal and in that kind of situation. So you always start thinking like, we all start thinking personal first, like why me, why with me, I did this for them, but why, how could they do this for me? But if you adopt this kind of framework, the framework that I explained, you will be like, come on, none of us have any agency in that sense. I have no agency, that person also have no agency. It's just a flow of property. So maybe the bad properties were flowing through that person at this moment, and the good properties in me, maybe this might get reversed or might not in our finite lifetime. But yeah, so this is just a way of thinking, that's I keep emphasizing like repeatedly. But this can under no circumstances be used as an excuse, just because when I say we have no agency, that's from a very global, distant, detached, third person statistical perspective. But if we start taking these arguments too literally and start saying that since I have no agency, I can do whatever the hell I want, and I am not a criminal, well, that's not what I'm saying, and that's not how it works. Because for in the finite lifetime of human beings, well, we since we have the power of objectively changing someone else's life for the good or the better, so we do have agency. And that's why all the laws, all the constitutions, or even all the morality that has a, that's not meaningless. I'm not saying that that's doesn't matter. Yeah, maybe from a global statistical physics average perspective, these kind of arguments might make sense, but at our local level, we cannot apply these arguments in our local level, and we cannot for instance use these arguments. Arpan said that none of us have agency because all of us are just some parts of a huge statistical system, and properties are flowing. So sometimes I'll be good, sometimes I'll be bad. So maybe right now I was bad, so I can do whatever the hell I want and I can justify my crimes. That's not what I'm saying, by the way. And please, I don't know, I'm not a celebrity, of course, but especially what's happening nowadays with these kind of things, people are like clipping videos or something of some creators out of context and showing. So if somebody shows you a clip of me saying just this, that we have no agency, it's all statistical physics, and then they write that Arpan is saying that criminals should not be punished. You see what I mean? So it's very dangerous actually. Well, I mean, of course, I have this full video as a proof, but on my YouTube channel. But it's always good to be cautious and like vigilant these days online. And because like I say in many of my videos, because this is something which I truly have observed, experienced in fact, that today's generation, they always have this tendencies of creating issues out of small things, because they do not have what it takes to solve the real problems in life. So creating issues out of small things becomes an escape from the real problems, and they can show that, see, we cared about humanity, we are like, what do they call it, human right activists, like we're the only one who understand this. Because I mean, you have ChatGPT, you can write a long, like, maybe it was a simple incident, it was not even targeted at you, but you believe that you are so important that everything happens because of you, everyone is targeting you personally, so you go to your social media and post a long emotional story about it, and you get some likes and that. So this is a very common pattern, that's why. And it's very dangerous. I mean, it's dangerous and also damaging as a whole. But well, I don't control, I can't say, I don't know. Yeah, so, but at the same time, maybe this is also the current generation getting stuck in some particular configurations for whatever the reason, because this is not really a very useful argument scientifically, because like I said, we are not in equilibrium. You can basically use this framework to explain away anything and everything. That's why I'm saying this is not a practical way to think of it. By this, I do not say that morality or crimes, they can be ignored, no. But this is just a way to think about it, because it's interesting and it gives you a detached perspective. But again, this perspective is not a practical perspective. It cannot work for real society. Because, well, you can basically say that since it's not an equilibrium system, you can explain everything and anything by saying that we are humans who are flowing through an ocean of properties in the property space. But that doesn't solve the problems. And that doesn't mean we can ignore what's happening in the world. So yeah, I think I made my point clear, and this is a pretty interesting video, interesting way to think about it. But just that, nothing more. And I would love to know your comments. Thank you.